Here is a really fun publication that just came out today. One of my PhD students, she's on staff at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and she just published her master's thesis in nuclear science and engineering. And this is a really exciting subject. It's nuclear criticality safety. Now with nuclear criticality safety, that's where you basically have to make sure that fissile material stays subcritical when it's not in the reactor. So that when you're processing fuel, when you're transporting fuel, whenever you're doing anything with enriched material, you want to make sure it's subcritical when it's not in the reactor. And why this is really exciting is that often what happens in nuclear criticality safety, actually it's kind of the default, is that you assume the worst case. You assume the worst that it could possibly be. So imagine for a second that you've got trash, literally trash, that you can't recycle, that's not useful in any way, and so you have to throw it away. For example, plutonium-contaminated materials that would normally go to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. It's a geological repository there in southeast New Mexico. And when you're sending it there, you've got to, again, make sure that the material stays subcritical, even though it's trash. But what happens is that generally, analysts will default to the worst case. You just assume the worst that could possibly be by theory, and then you know you're bounding. For example, I'm going to show you some examples here. There's a picture. You can see that picture right there where you have this sphere suspended in a waste box. And okay, that seems a little strange, but that's the most conservative, critical configuration, to have a sphere suspended in the middle of the box. Now, the way that the analysis is done is that the sphere has absolutely no poison. It's got the absolute maximum amount of fissile material and the optimal amount of moderating material, and it's homogeneous. That gives you the most reactive configuration. No poisons, perfect sphericity, and the reflector around it, again, has no poison. It's optimal amount of reflector material, so that you would actually have to spend an enormous amount of money to create that physically. And yet that's what's assumed to be the bounding model. No, it is the bounding model. That's assumed to be the standard model for nuclear criticality safety when you're transporting this stuff. So it means that you've got a very small amount of fissile material that you're allowed to carry, even though technically this would, for all intents and purposes, be impossible. You would not be able to attain this. So what actually happens in practice in industry is that you'll use judgment to reduce the amount of conservatism. So you're not modeling an impossible system. You're trying to be a little bit more credible. The problem with that is that it's very subjective. You don't have a way to reproduce it. It's based on personal opinions. And what this paper does is it comes up with a systematic way to pull back on the impossible scenario and make it more credible, but in a way that's reproducible, in a way that's like calculating a z-score. The title of the work is Demonstrating a Quantitative and Systematic Approach to Reducing Excess Conservatism in Nuclear Criticality Safety Analysis. And it just uses a mathematical approach that's like having a z-score, but for taking a distribution and saying, well, I want it to be conservative, like what this one did was to deviate from perfect sphericity and say, we're just going to have it be a little bit oval, and that's as much as we're going to do, but we're going to make sure that it's still very bounding and very conservative. And again, it takes away the subjectivity so that the regulators, the vendors, the constructors, the architect and engineering firms can all have the same metric that's not subjective. It now becomes systematic. So really exciting stuff. There's the title. Congratulations, Shar. Great work. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.